Hi everybody! On the day of Diem and Toan's reunion, the air feels heavier than usual, filled with memories that never truly faded and wounds that time alone could not heal. Their eyes meet again after so long, carrying love, regret, and the silent question neither of them dares to ask out loud. This reunion was once a dream, but dreams are rarely gentle when the past stands between two hearts. Yet, love is not the only thing waiting for them. Standing in the shadows is the pain caused by Toan's mother, choices made, lines crossed, and scars left behind. Forgiveness is a word that sounds simple, but costs everything when spoken from a broken heart. On this day of reunion, will Diem find the strength to forgive? Will Toan dare to ask for redemption on behalf of the woman who changed their fate forever? Because sometimes, reunion is not the end of the journey, it is the beginning of the hardest choice of all.
The day of their reunion arrived quietly, without celebration or warning. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that felt heavy yet gentle, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Diem stood near the old cafe at the corner of the street, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup she no longer drank from. People passed by, laughing, arguing, checking their phones, living ordinary lives while her heart counted every second. She had imagined this moment countless times. In some versions, she cried. In others, she turned away. But now that it was real, her mind was empty. All she could hear was her own heartbeat, steady and loud, echoing the years she had spent waiting. Then she saw him. Toan stood across the street, frozen in place, as if afraid that one more step would break the fragile reality forming between them. He looked thinner, quieter, like a man who had traveled through loss rather than distance. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. Their eyes met, and time seemed to fold inward, pulling the past and present into a single, breathless second. No words came. None were needed. Diem felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness alone, but from the strange mix of relief and pain that comes when something long lost finally returned. Toan took a hesitant step forward, then another. Each step felt like a confession of absence, of mistakes, of everything he had failed to say before disappearing. "I'm here," he finally said, his voice low and unsteady. Those two words shattered her defenses. She nodded, afraid that if she spoke, she would fall apart. The space between them closed, not with an embrace, but with a shared silence that carried years of unanswered questions. Yet beneath the warmth of reunion, a shadow lingered. Diem felt it in the way Toan's smile faltered, in the way his gaze briefly drifted away. This reunion was not free of the past. Somewhere beyond this fragile moment stood his mother, her choices, her mistakes, threads that had torn them apart once before. As they sat together side by side, the city continued to move around them. Cups clinked, cars passed, someone laughed too loudly nearby. Life, indifferent and relentless, reminded them that love alone could not erase everything. This was only the beginning. The reunion they had dreamed of had finally arrived, but the hardest question still waited to be answered.
Reunions rarely unfold the way people imagine. They are not made only of smiles and tears, but of pauses, long, uncertain pauses filled with everything left unsaid. After the cafe, Diem and Toan walked side by side through familiar streets, their steps naturally falling into the same rhythm. Nearby, motorbikes weaved through narrow lanes. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve, asking for sweets. Life went on, unaware that two people were standing at the fragile edge between the past and the future. Toan broke the silence first. "I didn't choose to forget," he said quietly. Diem stopped walking. She turned to him, steadying his face, searching for truth in his eyes. He looked like someone carrying invisible weight, memories half-formed, guilt fully intact. He spoke of the accident,
the confusion, the years when his mind felt like a locked room. Some doors opened randomly, others stayed shut no matter how hard he tried. And my mother. His voice trailed off. That name alone tightened the air between them.
Diem had prepared herself for this moment, yet her chest still ached. Toan's mother was not just a person in their story. She was the storm that had torn it apart. Decisions made in the name of protection had caused wounds that never fully healed. Separation, silence, years stolen and never returned. She did what she thought was right, Toan said, not as an excuse, but as a truth he was still struggling to accept himself. Diem looked away. She remembered the nights she cried alone, the mornings she woke up forcing herself to be strong, the small, everyday battles no one saw. Forgiveness was a beautiful word, but it was also heavy. It demanded more than understanding. It asked for letting go of pain that had become part of who she was. "I survived," she said softly, "but surviving isn't the same as forgetting." Toan nodded. He didn't reach for her hand, not yet. He knew this was not the time to ask for absolution. Above them, the sky shifted, sunlight briefly breaking through the clouds before retreating again. The moment felt symbolic, hope appearing, then hiding, testing their patience. They continued walking, carrying the same question between them. Could love endure the truth? And more importantly, could forgiveness grow where pain had taken root for so long?
Some decisions do not announce themselves loudly. They arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary moments. An unexpected knock, a familiar voice, a memory that refuses to stay buried. That evening, Diem stood by the kitchen window, watching steam rise from a pot of rice. The sound was soft, rhythmic, almost comforting. Outside, neighbors laughed over dinner. Someone argued playfully over the price of vegetables, and a radio played an old love song she had once listened to without understanding its sadness. Life continued in its simple, stubborn way. The knock came just as she turned off the stove. It was Toan. He stood there with a restrained expression, not the confident CEO the world once knew, but a man stripped down to his most human form. In his hand was a small, worn envelope, edges creased, paper yellowed by time. "I found this today," he said. Inside was a photograph. Young Diem smiled shyly at the camera, unaware of the future waiting for her. On the back, written in familiar handwriting, were words his mother had never intended for him to read. Regret, fear, control disguised as love. "She thought she was protecting me," Toan said, voice unsteady. "But reading this, I finally understand what she took from us." Diem felt her throat tighten. She had imagined this moment many times. Imagined anger, imagined triumph, imagined finally being seen. Yet what rose within her was something far more complicated, grief mixed with clarity. Forgiveness, she realized, was not something Toan could ask for on his mother's behalf, and it was not something she could give simply to ease the pain. They sat across from each other at the small dining table, the space between them filled with years of absence. The ticking clock seemed louder than usual, counting not seconds, but missed chances. "My mother will face the consequences," Toan said. "The law, the truth, everything. But whether you forgive her, that choice belongs to you." Diem closed her eyes. In her mind, memories surfaced, not just of betrayal, but of survival, of learning to stand alone, of becoming stronger in ways she never wanted to be. "I don't know if I can forgive her," she admitted, "but I know I don't want to live trapped by hatred anymore." Toan looked at her then, truly looked at her, as if seeing her strength for the first time. Outside, the radio song ended, replaced by silence. The night felt suspended, waiting. Forgiveness was no longer a question of right or wrong. It was a journey, one that neither of them could rush, and one that would define who they chose to become next.
The morning of the reunion arrived without ceremony. No dramatic skies, no sudden rain, just a pale sun climbing slowly above the rooftops, lighting the streets where people hurried to work, carrying bags of bread, worries, and quiet hopes. Life, once again, pretended nothing extraordinary was about to happen. 2DM stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. She adjusted her collar, not to look beautiful, but to feel steady. Today was not about appearances. It was about facing a past that had shaped her in silence. At the courthouse entrance, Toan waited. He looked different now, less guarded, more exposed. The building behind him loomed heavy with judgment, yet his eyes searched only for her. When their gazes met, the noise of the city softened, as if the world respectfully stepped back. Inside, Toan's mother sat quietly, no longer powerful, no longer feared. The woman who once controlled destinies now looked fragile, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted her head. When she saw 2DM, tears fell without warning, not loud, not theatrical, just honest. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I thought I could decide your lives. I thought love meant control." Silence followed. It was thick, uncomfortable, real. 2DM felt every eye on her, yet this moment was hers alone. Forgiveness, she had learned, was not forgetting. It was not excusing pain. It was choosing not to let the past poison the future.
"I won't say everything is forgiven," 2DM said calmly. "Some wounds take time. Some never fully heal." She paused, then added, "But I won't carry this hatred anymore." Toan exhaled, as if he had been holding his breath for years. He did not reach for Toan's hand, respecting the fragile space between what was broken and what might still be rebuilt. Outside the courthouse, the city resumed its rhythm. Vendors shouted, children laughed. A couple argued and made up within minutes. Ordinary life continued, proof that even after storms, the world keeps moving. As Toan and 2DM walked side by side, not touching yet perfectly aligned, something gentle settled between them. Not certainty, not promises, but possibility. Forgiveness, they understood, was not the ending of their story. It was the quiet beginning of a new chapter, one written not by fate alone, but by choice, courage, and the simple hope of loving better than before.